Hello, welcome to my presentation on Addiction 101. This is pretty wild. I haven't used Zoom in a long time since I was teaching college classes. So I guess it's been over 3 years. And I just gotta say before I start, this technology where I'm inside the PowerPoint, this is pretty wild. I feel like that boy in the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, not the Johnny Depp one. That was not the original one. The one with Gene Wilder. And I forget the boy's name, but he was obsessed with TV. And finally, they put him in TV. He's like, I think he was all into cowboys and being a cowboy. Well, that's me now. I'm in the TV, and I got to figure out which way I point. I could be like a weather person. But I digress. My ADH brain is on full alert. As I said, thank you so much for coming in here. This is in addition to Communicate Responsibly, the podcast I'm starting, and I'm going to stick with it for a year. I'm doing this in dry January, and that is something fairly new, which I think is awesome for people who just are curious about what being sober for a month or a week or a day is like. So, a couple people after I dropped my first, what is it called? I guess it's a YouTube channel, video podcast, whatever it was. They're like, hey, Brian, you should talk a little bit about communicate responsibly, where you got that idea from. And it's dry January, so they knew me and they knew those things would fit. The reason that I named my project, I'll just call it that, Communicate Responsibly, is because the alcohol industry has been using drink responsibly for a long time now. And that bugs me. So I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk about just an overview. I have gone into a lot of schools with this is a similar presentation that I brought into schools. I brought it into some community places, some workplaces with my first step consultation. I grabbed some slides. This is going to be fairly quick. And then I'm going to do another one, kind of a bonus to communicate responsibly, specifically on advertising of alcohol. And I think I have cigarettes in there too, just other what we would call addictive substances, mood altering chemicals. So, that being said, let's jump right in. And I named it Addiction 101. The term addiction clinically, we've gotten away from, just like saying somebody is an addict or alcoholic, somebody is clean or dirty. Those are stigmatizing words that we've kind of gotten away from. So this is where I can be the weatherman and say, now, I'm confused already. Now we would call it substance use disorders. Oh, there it is. Ah, well, you get the idea. So the how and why of substance use disorders. Substance use disorders would be addictions, but I want to talk about substance use in general. Substance abuse is a term you may still hear. Again, I think it's kind of stigmatizing because it puts the onus on the person. You are abusing a mood altering, addictive substance. Well, if anyone uses an addictive substance long enough, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get addicted, right? Or you're going to have a substance use disorder. So that's what I want to talk about. First of all, I want to get your thoughts. Oh, again, I'm in the way, but you can see it. All right. So think about this. I'll give you a minute. Maybe you should even write it down. Why do people use drugs? And again, drugs is another word clinically I probably wouldn't use. I would say substances. But why do people use mood altering chemicals, substances? Not abuse them, to use the old term, not, become addicted to them necessarily, but just use them. And I wish this was live. If I was in my presentation right now, it would be, but with you folks, it's not. So just think about that. And hopefully you have a couple words in your head. Why does the drug or substance that they use matter? So here I talk about, let's say somebody says, and the word addiction has come to, it's just meant a great many things. I'm addicted to the new Netflix series. New Game of Thrones is out. True story. I already watched the first one. It's pretty good. But I'm not addicted to it, right? I just enjoy it. So why does the drug that they use matter? Coffee versus alcohol. Cannabis versus, let's go for, might be a little bit of a up, but acid. Actually, both of those are in the hallucinatory realm. So, uppers versus downers versus all arounders. And if you haven't heard that language before, it's not clinical, but we could classify pretty much all mood altering chemicals into uppers, stimulants, downers, depressants, or all arounders, which are psychedelics or hallucinatory substances. Why does that matter? What the person uses. Again, just think about it. And in your mind, this is a very subjective thing. Which drugs, substances do you see as most dangerous? What are the ones you really got to watch out for? There's no right or wrong answers here, folks. I just want to get you thinking. And then if I go down here, what is the message we give young people about drug use, substance use? Again, this might be a pretty personal answer that you have. In your house, what was the message you got? With your kids, if you have kids, what was the message you got? In our society, what is the message we give about mood altering chemicals and substances? And we could even break that down. America is so big. What is the message about substances in New York State, where I live, versus, let's say, someplace in the Bible Belt down south? What is the message you would get? What are the messages in other cultures? I talk a lot in this presentation about the difference between France and Italy. France and Italy have almost the same amount of wine consumption. However, in France, the level of people who have a substance use disorder, addiction, alcoholism in particular, is much higher. Why is that? Well, the answer to that is culturally how drunkenness is viewed in France versus Italy. In Italy, it's a big taboo to be seen as drunk, intoxicated. In France, it's not. So these messages that we give young people have a lot to do with the amount of substances that are used in any particular culture and the substance that is used. Hopefully this is starting to connect, make a little bit of sense with you. But let me move on. So here are some reasons. These are 5 historical themes of substance use. This is from a textbook that I used to use when I was teaching at a local college. For 13 years, I was in charge of the substance use disorder program. And actually, the acronym was it was the CASAC program. So in New York State, a CASAC is a credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor. I am a CASAC. I have been since 2001. And so I would train up and coming substance use disorder counselors. I did that for 13 years before I left that job. And I am now a trainer for New York State OASAS currently as I video this. And I also go around again with first step consultation and do some trainings. But this was from a textbook, and I think it's really true. So any substance we talk about, why do people use it? Number one, to cope with their environment. Makes sense. Think about different cultures, places that people live, to cope with the environment. Another thing to keep in mind in terms of themes is susceptible brain chemistry. I'm going to get back to that idea of drinking responsibly and why some people can't do it. I cannot, right? Because as soon as I have one drink, something happens in my brain that would not happen in other people's brains that do not have this predisposition, this genetic wiring for substance use disorder. The third theme we see in substance use is guess what? People make money off substance use. I know, shocking, isn't it? But so businesses and governments are always going to be involved in substances. There's money to make. And again, the other reason they are involved, and I absolutely agree with this, is to keep it safer. So people were kind of shocked when years before cannabis became legal, they come to me and be like, Brian, cannabis is going to be legal. And then what do you think is going to happen? And I said, well, it's probably going to be safer, right? We're probably going to know how much THC we have in the cannabis. It's probably going to be regulated. It won't be mixed. And we could say the same thing with any substance. There are some places in the world where all substances have been legalized. And again, I'm not saying that is the be all end all answer, but I do think beyond the idea of it making money for businesses and governments, when regulated correctly, it can be safer than something you bought off the street and was mixed with things that could potentially really harm you or kill you. I got to get out of the way here again for this one. Okay. Refinement, synthesizing, and manufacturing methods. There it is. Number four. So, every single substance out there, folks, I'll ask you, has it gotten stronger or has it gotten weaker in 2026 from 2016, from 2006, from 1996, from 1986? Every single substance has gotten stronger. And every time we see a substance get stronger, it's refined, it's synthesized, it's more effective, I guess we could even say, even though that's weird to say. There is an uptick in the amount of trouble that we have with that substance. An interesting parallel to this would be with addictive behaviors. So, the clinical term for addictive behaviors, like gambling, gambling is kind of the granddaddy, the grandmama of all addictive behaviors. If we looked at substances, it would be alcohol is the oldest one. We know the most about it. Gambling is that in the addictive behavior mode. So they still use that word addictive behavior, even though it's clinical, which is a little odd, but I don't think they've come up with a better one. Every addictive behavior's gotten stronger. That's my point. And I don't think that will surprise you either. When your phone bings or pings, yes, this is my phone. I'm an old man. I have the wallet phone thing, but I think it rocks and I won't get rid of it. But every time your phone bings or pings, or every time you got to check your status, or every time you got to go on there, you are triggering the same chemicals in your brain that are triggered by substances in different ways. Um, that might not shock you. I know a lot of people know more about dopamine than they ever did before, but it also triggers other substances that I think we'll get into a little bit more in a slide. And you'll see why when people say I'm addicted to certain behaviors, maybe not Netflix, but others, they're not lying. And behaviors certainly can be addictive. All right, and then this last one, new methods of using. Vaping, right? So cigarettes, the use of cigarettes was going down in the 90s, and that was wonderful. And that's actually when I quit. I quit smoking cigarettes and using alcohol on November 13th, 1996. I couldn't quit one without the other, so that's not really a flex, but I found that I could not smoke cigarettes without having a desire to drink. And I certainly could not drink alcohol without having cigarettes. The craving for those two were so closely related that I couldn't stop one without the other. And in truth, my bigger priority between the two, alcohol and cigarettes, I wanted to quit smoking more than I wanted to quit drinking, but had to do them both. So new methods of use. When cigarette smoking rates went down, we all said this is good because young people were smoking a lot. I started when I was 12 or 13. I know E.T. was out in the movie theaters, and I was down in New York City, and I had, or Long Island actually. I used to go there in the summers. Fell in love with Donna. Oh, Donna, I hope you're watching this, but that was long ago and far away. She was a smoker, and she got me smoking too. I probably had my first beer with Donna as well. But anyway, back then, the movie Grease was out and everyone was smoking in that. We saw a lot of smoking, we being the young people. It was glamorized, it was cool. My dad smoked, my mom never did, and he quit. And over time, society started pushing back on smoking. So by the end of the 1990s, it really was becoming taboo to smoke. We saw those rates drop. At the same time, nicotine companies said, we're going to help you quit. We're going to come out with, they didn't call them vapes back then. They were like nicotine pens. And the idea was you were going to taper the level of nicotine down in your body. Made sense rather than going cold turkey. However, when those nicotine pens and those early vapes came out, guess what they did with the nicotine levels? Popped them right up. And also, as I'll show in my other presentation, for nicotine companies to say they weren't advertising to young people, boy, I don't think that's really true. But that is more for the other presentation. So when a new method of using, like vaping, comes out, we see that people have problems, and the number of problems in our society goes up as well. Historically, that's not going to end. Think about this. When do you think problems with alcohol, I'm using the old word abuse here, but alcohol problems started in America? What is the history of alcohol problems in America? How far back do you think it goes? I should cue the Jeopardy music here. Well, there are stories as old as when people came over, maybe not the Mayflower, but those early boats, that there were some, not riots, but heavy discontent associated with running out of alcohol on the boat. And you hear people say, I've had a lot of discussions that people drank alcohol or mead, as it was called in those days, because they would get sick from the water. They didn't know which water was safe or not safe. Might be true. We need to remember that in the early days, the alcohol levels were so low that people really, even if they were imbibing more, they certainly were not having problems with it at the levels we do now. So that sounds a little vague. Let me drill down a little bit on that. When I was drinking in the 1980s and 1990s, the average beer had an alcohol content of 2.5 to 3%. That was the average alcohol content of a beer. Guess what it is now? Cue the music. It's around 5%. So it's doubled. And I'm not talking about the IPAs, is that what they're called? I'm not talking about the ones that crank the levels of alcohol up even more. So that's not one drink anymore. So back in the day, when we're talking about mead or early alcohol when America was formed, alcohol levels were very low. I will give you, I think I have it right here. Oh, yes. If you're interested in this, it's a very official way to do it. Check out this book, Slaying the Dragon: The History of Addiction Treatment and Recovery in America. This guy, William White, you can Google him. You can find a lot of talks he's done too. But he does a very good job of talking about addiction. Um, oh, I don't know if you saw that. I got to put it down here. Slaying the Dragon: The History of Addiction Treatment in America. And his name, freaking camera. And his name is William White. So there's a picture right in the front. I got to read this to you. It says, the law must recognize a leading fact that medical, not penal treatment reforms the drunkard. And if you just giggled when I said penal, this means we can't lock them up, right? Guess when that was taken? That was at the early part of the alcohol reforms in the 1900s. I want to say 1905. Which brings us back to the slide. How long have problems with alcohol been around in America? Since America was formed. And they became so bad that alcohol was made illegal. You probably all heard about the Prohibition, which lasted from early 1920s to the early 1930s. That is how big of a problem alcohol became in America. So I don't think prohibition is taught in schools, public schools. I didn't learn about it, but it would be really good for you who have access to children, teenagers, to let them know that the prohibition happened because alcohol was such a dangerous drug, if you use that word, or substance in our society. It was made illegal across the country. There are great PBS specials about prohibition. I think they're very objective and measured. Sometimes I see people have this idea when they look back in history that prohibition was a complete failure, that you can't tell Americans what to do. We kind of look back on it and wink when it comes to prohibition. But that series does a good job of pointing out that all the things we struggle with now with alcoholism, like DUIs, impaired driving, like incarceration due to maybe it's violence from alcohol, especially it can be violence at home that happens, domestic violence from alcohol, the diseases that happen from alcohol. Alcohol is the only substance that I have learned about that affects every single cell in the body toxically. And I'm not making that up. You can look at that too. Why is it called an intoxicant? Toxic is right in there. It's toxic to every single cell in the body. So because of that, we had prohibition from the early 20s to the start of the 30s. And one more thing about prohibition. Why did it come back? Because businesses and governments were losing a lot of money. Why did cannabis become legal? Not that I disagree with it. This is going to make people money, right? So that's why prohibition ended. And we just, again, need to get honest about that. So in the 1930s, alcohol is legal again. And in 1935, Alcoholics Anonymous is formed. It was only a few years after alcohol became legal. But something a lot of people don't know is that we had our best scientists and doctors working on the cure for alcoholism. And there's a lot of weird ones out there. There was something where you would drink gold and the gold would take away craving. There are a lot of different quote unquote cures. But Alcoholics Anonymous, this is the 90th year celebration officially of when it started in our country, has been one of the most successful programs, and it is evidence-based. I'm sure I'll talk more about that and communicate responsibly, but it's another thing you can look into, and if you want more information on AA, you can get in touch with me. So by 1953, the AMA declared alcoholism a medical illness. Why just alcoholism and not other quote unquote addictions? Because alcoholism is the granddaddy of them all. We had the most research. It's legal. We could learn about it, but it was declared a medical illness. The DSM, about the same time in 1952, uh, declared that alcoholism was a disease and it gave you some reasons. By the way, here's a very simple way to remember why alcoholism and other addictions, substance use disorder, are diseases. Diseases only need three things: a known cause or causes. We know what causes every single substance use disorder. A known progression, and all that means is what's going to happen if I don't treat this disease. That's the known progression, and we know what that is. And a known outcome or outcomes. And if you do not intervene with a active substance use disorder or addictive behavior, it is going to progress and certain things are going to happen. A very famous researcher, medical researcher named Jellinek, did a lot on this in the early 1950s that led to the AMA and the DSM, including alcoholism. The biggest research there was called the Jellinek's curve. It's still used, and it shows you here's the first drink or the first use of cannabis or the first time that you logged on to the internet or you place that first bet when you were gambling. And then it shows you for someone who develops a substance use disorder, it's that upside down bell curve. It goes down uh, and basically they lose things, right? They lose like their freedom, they lose their choice, their cravings go up, it affects relationships, it's going to affect your physical and mental health. And the old saying in Alcoholics Anonymous is the result is jails, institution, and death. I don't think that's changed that much. But the good news is because of all this research and knowing that addiction is a disease, we have been able to step in before people lose all those things. That certainly was the case in my for me, when I stopped drinking and using substances when I was 26 years old. I didn't have a family yet. I didn't have a career. I was barely employable. Um, but for a lot of people, because we know this, they don't have to hit that quote unquote bottom. So if you're someone who believes that someone has to hit a bottom before they get sober, that absolutely is not true. All right. So I'll go down here a little bit. DSM-5, that is the one we're using now. I can't believe that came out 12 years ago. I remember when that came out. And I remember people that I was working with being like, I don't want to use a DSM-5. I'm only going to use the DSM-4 because they change all the codes up. And they changed, here's what's key, back to responsible communication, the language. They changed the language. That's when they started saying substance abuse disorders. Since then, like I said, we say substance use disorders. And they put severity of addiction on a spectrum. Believe it or not, before the DSM-5, it was use, abuse, dependence. Those were the three choices you had. But now we know someone may have let's say it's an alcohol use disorder, but it's just slight, right? We can interrupt it if we look back on Jelnik's curve. Maybe moderate or it may be severe. We've used that same continuum, that same spectrum for mental health disorders like depression, maybe mild depression, all the way to severe depression for years, for decades. But the DSM-5 started using that same language for substance use disorders. I think it's awesome because nobody wants to be put in a box, right? So the other thing, I mentioned this before, DSM-5 also clarifies gambling as an addictive disorder, and craving is listed as a symptom of all addictions. Craving, that's a big one. Until the DSM-5, we did not recognize craving as a biological thing that people who suffer from substance use disorders have a problem with. And someone who is on their way to a substance use disorder is going to struggle with craving too. Let's pause, think about that for a minute. I made a joke before about, wanting to binge Netflix, but certainly going into technology, whether it's binge watching, which is not a great term, but I know it's one people use because, again, binging can be associated with eating disorders. And anytime we're using language, taking it from a clinical place and dropping it in general conversation, doesn't do great things for the actual clinical thing that we're talking about. But using technology, watching shows one after the other, is that a means of escape? Can be. I know I still do it. Is that something people may do when they are depressed? Absolutely. Is it a way of disassociating or not dealing with things? 100%. And the thing that we really want to think about, and I hope you think about for yourself and your loved ones, is the craving. Am I able, here's a good one, am I able to go anywhere without my phone and not be completely, who's texting me? Who's calling me? I was blessed enough to grow up in a world where I wasn't connected to a phone, right? So I remember those days. But that craving, that anxiety of I'm missing out or something, or I have to grab something and put it inside me, is what we're talking about when it comes to people who either have a substance use disorder or an addictive behavior that's been diagnosed, or they're on their way. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so moving on. Addiction is a disease. Why don't people believe it? There's my old friend Joe Camel. When I smoked, I didn't smoke Camels. I smoked Marlboros and Marlboro Lights. But people have said for years, and I think it still goes on, addiction is choice. It's a choice. None of the research, medical scientific research we have backs that, folks. So if we go into brain chemistry, as I mentioned earlier on, for me, I have something called a reward control pathway. We all have it. And it goes from my old brain, right back here by my spinal cord, up to the newest part of my brain, right up here, the hypothalamus. It's the last part that's formed. Guess what age it is fully formed in people? You may already know this. Pick an age, any age. It's the last organ in your body to fully mature. There's a hint. 25. Age 25-ish is when the brain fully forms. And up here, the last part to form is the thing that slows you down from acting impulsively. Old brain is fight or flight. Yeah, I'm scared. Someone cut me off in traffic. Or, ooh, that feels really good. First kiss. Or first taste of that ice cream. I like ice cream. That is the thing that produces craving. Your hypothalamus, the most advanced part, last part of our brain to form, says, okay, you're full now. Mine doesn't work correctly. And for me, I know some of that was genetic, that this runs in my family, substance use disorders. But it also was because when something felt good, I just kept pressing the button. I want more ice cream, more ice cream, more ice cream. A couple drinks made me feel relaxed. I know now I have had anxiety most of my life. It's gotten better as I got older. ADHD would be the classification of anxiety I've had. Woo, alcohol worked real well on that until it didn't. Surprisingly, cigarettes worked really well too. Cigarettes, nicotine in general is an interesting substance because, yeah, it's a stimulant, but it also relaxes you. And it relaxes you because it works on that substance you've all heard of, dopamine, and it also works on one called GABA, which alcohol also works on. And those are brain chemicals that calm you down. So cigarettes, even though, and nicotine, I should say, even though it helps you focus and you're getting alert, it also calms you down at the same time. Kind of odd. So that is the whole thing about choice. I would say, and again, I've been doing this for a while. I've talked to a lot of people who don't have substance use disorders, that people are attracted to alcohol by and large, from what I've heard, because it is somewhat predictable. of the substances we talk about, addictive substances, for people who don't have a substance use disorder, they know what a beer or two will do for them. It's a depressant and it kind of relaxes them, right? If you continue to go beyond that, one or two drinks, your body is going to work up a tolerance to that toxic substance in your body. Remember, alcohol is a intoxicant, it's a toxic substance. So you're going to need more to get the same result. And that is where people start chasing that high. I know that happened for me with alcohol. The way I used to feel at two or three or four beers, actually, I had a pretty high tolerance right from the start. So I gotta be honest, I had 4 or 5 beers before I would feel anything. And having a high tolerance, by the way, is another kind of sign that your bloodline may have some type of addiction in it. If you can right off the bat handle more alcohol than other people. But for me, I had to drink more and more and more. And luckily, I say luckily, I didn't appreciate it at the time. At age 26, for some reason, my tolerance turned around and I started blacking out, having times when I wasn't remembering what I did at lower and lower levels of alcohol. So I see that as a gift now because it was one of the reasons that I said, "Oh, this isn't good. I don't like what this is doing to me." And it pushed me to start that experiment of quitting alcohol and cigarettes, which turned into a longer term commitment, which I'm very grateful for. So this idea of choice goes back to the brain and that reward control pathway. For some people, the craving is so strong that they have a hard time saying, I'm full or I've had enough. And I've talked about food a few times. I still have that with food. I have to be very careful because I will finish that ice cream. I will eat all those cookies, even though I know I've gone beyond. First taste is always the best taste, right? I've gone far beyond that, but I'll just keep going. That is who I am. I do not think it is a choice, right? And no medical or scientific research kind of supports that. So again, if you want to have a deeper discussion about that, get in touch with me. Here's some things I was just telling you about. Dopamine pathways and serotonin pathways. I throw these two natural chemicals up because everyone's heard about them before. What do they have us feel? Motivation, euphoria. They help you with fine tuning. Now, if you have too much dopamine, it actually can turn into compulsions. So people who have obsessive compulsive disorder, that's a mental health disorder, diagnosable. And it's another one I hear all too often in general conversation. Oh, I'm so OCD. Are you really? Um, but a true obsessive compulsive disorder often has to do with the dopamine level that that person has in their mind. Also, high levels of dopamine can cause people to become paranoid about things. You've seen this if you've watched any kind of movie about cocaine and strong stimulants, from Scarface to Blow to, God, I'm old. Those are old movies. But if you've watched any of the newer ones about cocaine, you'll see people get to a point where they think people are coming, they're at the door. It's because cocaine over time has boosted those dopamine levels into a place of compulsions and having severe paranoia about things. So these are natural, dopamine and serotonin. And as I mentioned before, the nature may be this existed in your bloodline. And when I go into schools, it's something that kids don't know about because their parents don't talk about it. Mine didn't. And again, that's not a slight on them. You just didn't really talk about these things in the 80s. I'm sure their parents didn't talk about it with them. We certainly didn't talk about mental health problems because we didn't know a lot about them. But if in your bloodline there is a history of mental health problems, you are at higher risk for substance use disorders. If there is, obviously, any history of substance use disorders, you're at a higher risk. And if you got both, that's double trouble. You got to be really careful. If there is no risk, but you just keep pressing the button, right? You're going to overblow that fuse. If you use addictive substances or addictive behaviors over time excessively, the chances that your tolerance is going to grow and you're going to want more are that much more. And craving is one of the things we really got to pay attention to. Are you able to shut it off? And if you're not, maybe there's something to take a look at. All right. So I already mentioned this, but it's really important to recognize if there's any kind of mental health issue. Because, as I've said in my little story I've given you here, self-medicating works. Alcohol worked great for me until it didn't. There is also a history of depression in my family. And guess what? If you use a depressant long enough, not only is it going to slow you down and calm you down, you're going to get depressed. And I found that happened for me. So to this day, I am on medications. I am on medications for depression. It used to be called dysthymia. I think of like Eeyore, which is a low grade kind of dysthymia. I'm not getting much out of life. But I was told by my last therapist, I've had several over the years, and it's something I would recommend for you, that dysthymia is not something that insurance companies will even acknowledge anymore. You have to have a stronger level of depression for that. Anxiety, as I said, ADHD, medications can help folks. And medications are different than using substances because when they are used correctly, your body will not develop a tolerance for that medication, or if it does, it develops it much slower than when you're throwing down 12 beers or putting all this cannabis in your body. It is a way of giving your body just enough so it gets over that problem that you may have with producing serotonin or dopamine. Gives it just enough of a boost. And besides medications, I would never say the pill or the shot is going to do it for you. There's always behaviors that you got to do that will help boost dopamine and serotonin as well. There's lots of them out there. Feeding my birds is one of them. Gives me great pleasure. So this, I'm going back down here. Use of hallucinogenics, including marijuana, can trigger latent schizophrenia. What? That one often surprises young people, and I'm not making it up. So marijuana, which we're now being asked to call cannabis, that was what it was called before Prohibition, to go back to the 1920s. Guess what happened during Prohibition? Alcohol was illegal, it was difficult to get. The number of people drinking went way down. More people started smoking cannabis. So in the 1930s, there was this campaign that came out to make cannabis seem more scary. And it also was so blatantly racist against people. It was just crazy. They wanted to get people drinking again, so they really went after the risks of cannabis. So nowadays, as I said, why was I for the legalization of cannabis? I want to know how much THC versus CBD is in cannabis. I don't use cannabis. It's just, for me, sober is the way to go. But if I was someone who benefited from cannabis, and there are medical benefits for certain people, I would want to know THC is the hallucinogenic substance. That's more of the intoxicant. CBD is a type of depressant um, or downer, and that helps with anxiety. So I think it's good that now people are able to see and learn and educate themselves because THC over time, that high level of hallucinogenic, just like acid, PCP, or other hallucinogenic substances, can trigger latent schizophrenia. And if I go back to the chemicals I talked about before, that has a lot to do with the level of dopamine that shoots off. Because too much dopamine, as we saw on the slide before, you get into that paranoid thinking, you have obsessive thoughts, and it can even get to delusional thinking. So if there's a history of schizophrenia in your family, and there is one in mine, staying away from hallucinogenics, real important. Okay, I think I got one more slide here. Oh, that's my questions and resources. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you reach out to me. You can reach me at my email. That's probably the best way to reach me. And I also hope you check out, this is my website. I'm just getting it cleaned up now as I start this year-long journey. But I have a lot of resources, which I'll put on the resources page. That makes sense for you to check out there. Thanks for sticking with me. I'm really glad you came, and I hope you keep watching. Take care of yourself, folks, and look for some natural highs. Great ways to boost your dopamine and serotonin without putting any substances in. Take care.